I just want to say hey everyone, and thank you so much for coming to today's presentation. This is the fourth talk in our series so far for IPASS, and my name's Kylie, and I'll be moderating the talk today. Just a short little kind of, intro of what the talk will be. It's going to be about 45 minutes long. There'll be a short Q&A after. If you have any questions, please type it in the chat, and I'll be moderating the chat, so you can send it to everyone or me, and then I will pass it on to Erin. We'll try and go over as many as we can in the Q&A after. And the title of this talk is, what do you mean there's a social worker at the vet college, the role of social workers in veterinary medicine? Erin, do you want me to give like a little intro of you, because I have one typed up, or would you rather just like me pass it over to you?
Is it embarrassing? It's probably a bio that I sent, hey?
Yeah, it's like long and like in depth.
Yeah, okay, let's not do that. I'll just introduce myself, and then we can get rolling, because they make you do all these bios for conferences, and there is nothing that makes me more uncomfortable than being like, here's the laundry list of things I've done in my career. It's so awkward. Like, it's like when I first went to veterinary conferences and everyone led by their letters. They're like, I'm Dr. So-and-so from this place. I'm like, cool, I'm Erin. Sup? So anyway, hey guys, I'm Erin. What's up? I will give you just sort of the Coles notes. I am the person who founded the veterinary social work program at the Western College of Vet Med back in 2014. I did it as a part of my graduate work, and you know, it's kind of like the Hotel California. Once you check in, you just can never leave. So because I got to do really cool work there, I have stuck it out. You're going to hear a little bit about the client groups that I see, but I see people who are staff. I see people who are students. I see people who are faculty. I also see clients of the large and small animal clinic. And then I do like all kinds of stuff in community in terms of continuing education and community development work and interprofessional work in the community. So we're going to get into all of that stuff, because that's what we're here to talk about, is interprofessional stuff. And we're supposed to talk about that in a way where, you know, hopefully you guys glean some new information, and, you know, we all come out of it, you know, feeling, I don't know, educated. So first things first, I am going to do a land acknowledgement. I don't know how many of you guys have been through a land acknowledgement through the process of IPASS, but I tend to do these a little bit differently. So I want to acknowledge that currently where I am, I'm in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. So I don't know where you guys are. I'm assuming you're in Saskatoon, but if you're distance learning, you might be elsewhere. So I'm currently located in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which is on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. Now, typically that's where your land acknowledgement stops, right? That's where somebody says, okay, like I did my white settler duty, I acknowledged the land, and that's where I'm just going to stop right there. Now, my presentation today specifically doesn't get into decolonization and anti-racist work or any of that kind of stuff, but that is core to my belief system as a social worker, and core to my belief system is how I do my job on the day-to-day. So I just don't believe in doing land acknowledgements as like this tokenism nod to colonial history. I think that we need to be a little bit more thoughtful about that. And so if we're going to be really, really critical in sort of our thinking, and we're going to have decolonizing language as a part of the stuff that we're doing, and we're focusing on looking at the historical implications of colonial oppression, we need to educate ourselves. And as healthcare practitioners, this stuff permeates everything we do. That includes you veterinarians. You wait till you see Dr. Jordan Woodsworth. She gonna tell you, you gonna learn. So anyway, that's me basically starting the call to action. And there's some things that you guys can do to sort of begin your anti-racist work in a really good way. And one of those things is you can read the 94 calls to action with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And anybody can access those. And you can have a look through there to see what some of those calls to action are that we can meet as healthcare practitioners. And that's a really exciting place to start, because that's coming from communities that have been disproportionately impacted by colonial history. So that's one thing you can do. The other thing you can do is the University of Alberta has created this Indigenous Canada set of modules. There's 12 of them. They are awesome. and they are free. So it's basically being able to do a university class. So if you were somebody who went through school and you didn't get any Indigenous studies background or anything like that, and you're going to be working in healthcare, 10 out of 10 recommend that you access that at some point. So that's where I'm going to leave things in terms of my land acknowledgement, you guys getting to know me. Obviously, I'm a very animated speaker, so I'm going to not be a talking head, because apparently when I share this lecture with y'all, you're not going to be able to see anything of this guy, but maybe that's okay. So we will start sharing. Oh, I just did this. I don't know why it's so hard. Here we go. And then I will see you guys in a moment. So from the beginning, Kylie, can you just confirm that you can see this and hear me?
Yes, I can see it and I can hear you.
Perfect, but you can't see my face.
No, cannot see your
face. All right, well, these earrings were a waste. Shall we carry on, folks? So this is me. I'm the clinical associate social work for the Western College of Vet Med. I've kind of already talked about that a little bit. But basically what that means is that I work out of the University of Saskatchewan Western College of Veterinary Medicine as a social worker. And I'm going to talk to you about veterinary social work and what veterinary social work actually is as a subspecialty of social work practice. I'm going to talk to you guys a bit about the human-animal bond, which is HAB on there. I'm going to talk about human-animal interaction. I'm going to talk about the link. Yes, it is meant to be in all caps. I'm going to go through some case examples, talk about Zoea, and then I'm going to talk about how I incorporate this stuff into practice and sort of maybe some recommendations that I might make to you guys about how you could incorporate animals into practice, because I think it's really key and important. Now, what's interesting about all of these subject headings is each one of these can actually be an hour-long lecture. So sometimes I feel like when I'm doing this presentation that I'm going to be a significant disappointment because I can't get into them in all of the real ways that I would like to. So please, if you've got questions as we're going along, post them in the chat. I will do my best to answer all of them before we're done for today. And we can hopefully, just put to rest any other questions that you might have as we go through her. So what the heck is veterinary social work? So veterinary social work is credited with being started at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, down in the United States. And when UTK started veterinary social work, their areas of focus were basically animal-assisted interventions, the link between human and animal violence, compassion fatigue as it impacts on veterinarians as a profession, and then finally, grief and loss in companion animals. So that was sort of the foundation that the profession was built on a number of years ago when Dr. Elizabeth Strand started this idea of veterinary social work. My take on veterinary social work is a little bit different. Because I live and work in Saskatchewan, I've sort of had different things come across my path. And when I started the program, I was really open to what might come down the pipe and what might be some places where there's gaps and where social work services are needed. And so I didn't really close the door in entirety to any kind of human and animal interface that might need some support. Now, the whole idea of veterinary social work was sort of couched in this idea of One Health. And you guys have probably heard about One Health at some point. If you haven't, you will. But One Health was really built on this foundation of the way that disease transmits between human beings, animals, and across the environment. And so the idea was, veterinary social work is kind of similar because we deal with human beings and animals in their environment. And what I would just encourage you guys to do is expand environment to go beyond sort of physical environment and think about it in terms of geographic space. Think about it in terms of a person in their environment, and think about environment as also including our social sphere or our social environment. And so those folks that are in healthcare professions, you guys will be talking about the social sphere of people's lives all the time. And so that's not much of a stretch. But I just want to frame this in that way. So that's what veterinary social work started out as, is sort of these key areas of support. And then I've just remained open to expanding it within the Canadian context to the places that needed my help. And we'll get into those when we get into case examples. So let's talk about the human-animal bond. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this photograph or this image. This was an image that was captured during the Fort McMurray fires a number of years ago. And the reason that I love this image is not just because I am a horse person and I ride horses myself, and I could foresee myself doing exactly what this woman is doing, but also because I think it really captures the lengths that people will go to for their animals in a time of crisis, which really speaks to how much we value them as a part of our families. So if you look at the research around how many folks actually have animals, it's usually between 70 and 75% of North American homes have some kind of animal that they are sharing their lives with. So that might be a cat or dog or fish or birds or rabbits or hamsters or lizards or guinea pigs or snakes or frogs or horses, but they are sharing their home with some form of animal that could be considered more companion animal like. Now, I know there's going to be horse people on here who are like, horses aren't companion animals. And I'm going to say, I know they fall somewhere in this weird mixture between livestock and companion animals, but we certainly typically feel different, we feel differently about our horses than we might about our cows. And so that's how I'm going to frame this. But what we know about the human-animal bond is that it's really core to our connection to ourselves and to others. And often animals are identified as a part of our family, and they're places of unconditional love and acceptance. And, you know, if you're a social work human on here, and I don't know if any of you guys are, or I guess other disciplines, you guys probably use genograms and family system theory too. You will see that when you use some of those tools for family assessments or things like that, the thing that we've started to do is include animals as a part of that assessment tool, because animals factor in to the habitual rhythms of a family's life. And so we can't ignore the importance that animals play. It's the same way that we know that when Hurricane Katrina hit and people couldn't evacuate with their animals, they stayed in their houses, risking their own lives because they had nowhere to go with their dog or cat. It's the same way that when the North was on fire a number of years ago in Saskatchewan, we were setting up triage systems to be able to safely shelter cats and dogs for people that needed it. So all of that is just my way of saying that we know that the human-animal bond is really important, and that we know that it's a component that we really need to take into consideration. Kylie, I think somebody's mic is unmuted, so if you could have a look-see and see if we can mute it, that would be amazing, because I don't know if that's distracting for other folks.
I'll do that.
So let's move on to this next bit. Oh, too far. Human-animal interaction. So this is me and Beef. Beef was the dog of Dr. Clark, who's our Associate Dean Academic at the Western College of Veterinary Medicine. Beef was a blood donor and also just like the most wonderful boy on the planet. But I use this picture for human-animal interaction because that face that I'm making there, I was jazzed to be hanging out with Beef. I did not want to have my photo taken that day, but they gave me a dog and I was like, all right, I'll do this for you. We can make some stock photos. So we need to think about the interactions that we have with animals and how they benefit folks, right? So in this case, they gave me Beef and I was more willing to, you know, take a bunch of photos that they use for promotional stuff at the WCVM. But human-animal interaction really encompasses sort of any place where we see the addition of animals. So maybe you could think about it in terms of St. John's ambulance dogs, or when you see dogs taken into long-term care facilities or correctional facilities, all of that kind of stuff. That's what human-animal interaction means. And it's very, very different than animal-assisted therapy, because animal-assisted therapy is really where you are working with a person and an animal, and there are therapeutic goals attached to their counseling work that incorporate that animal. So I want you guys to be able to delineate between those two things. I am all for human and animal interaction. I am all for animal-assisted therapy. But I think one of the things that we consistently miss is the animals that already exist in people's lives and that are really animals that they're already bonded to and that provide a real source of strength for people. And sometimes I think we miss out on those companion animals that people already share their lives with as being potential sources of support. And I'm saying that now because my next few slides, I'm going to talk about tons of the challenges that arise in the human-animal bond and the human-animal interface, right? And I just don't want us to spend all of this time talking about all of the challenges and forget that there are strengths. So The next few slides, this is why I have this warning slide. The next few slides, some of them might be a little bit upsetting, some of the images. So I just want to prepare you guys. I'm going to tell you some of what's in there. But these slides are going to focus on some of those case examples that I promised that give you an idea of what veterinary social work is all about, the kinds of cases I deal with, because social workers don't often get called when things are great, right? But that doesn't mean that I don't also see the benefit of animals in the ways that they can support my clients. And so after we go through some of these case examples, then I'm going to talk about Whaddya and some of the really positive outcomes of having animals in our lives. So some of the things that you can expect are some images of clutter hoarding, of domestic squalor, animals inappropriately housed. There are a couple of pictures of deceased animals, but they're very clean pictures. And what they show is tooth decay and ear mites. So it's not, there's nothing gruesome in that sense coming. But I do like to warn people because the veterinary folks are like, yeah, no big deal often. But some of our other healthcare professionals are like, whoa, that's a lot of imagery, Erin. So I just want to prepare you for that stuff. So without further ado, the first one has none of that imagery on it. What I'm going to talk to you about is my first client group. And that's my veterinarians, my veterinary students that I provide support for, my registered veterinary technicians, and other staff that are attached to my role. So this is like the bad news slide. And I really wish you guys could see my face because you would see me gesturing and you would see exactly how little I enjoy presenting this slide, because I feel like this slide is the bummer slide that says that everybody in veterinary medicine is going to end up experiencing these things. And I don't think that that is the case. What we're really talking about is just the fact that there are risk factors and the fact that because I'm a social worker working in veterinary medicine, I have to be aware of those risk factors and then be able to provide support accordingly. So with vets, we know that they have a pretty high suicide rate, and that's not a big surprise to most people in veterinary medicine because they've probably heard that before. It's pretty well publicized, but sometimes that's very surprising to other folks because they say, what about dentists and lawyers? And I say, I know. And we have studies that show that specifically veterinary surgeons have a rate that's twice that of dentists and 4 times that of the general population for having suicide ideation and just higher risks of suicide. We also see sort of this increased lethality, specifically with women in veterinary medicine, where poisoning is used as a method. And unfortunately, we see lots of folks who have sort of this just in case stockpiling that they do in the event that they aren't able to resolve their mental health issues. And that's because there's this advanced access to a means of dying. So because veterinarians need access to all kinds of stuff for euthanasia and for other processes that can be used for overdose, we see a lot of access to the means for suicide. And then we also see a crossing of boundaries related to scope of practice. So when it says palliative and mental health belief, what I'm talking about is I get a lot of veterinarians that have decided that because they are doctors in their own right, they are going to self-diagnose and step outside their scope of practice. And they're going to say, well, listen, I'm depressed and that's how I feel. And I'm going to self-diagnose that, and then I'm going to root myself in that belief system and say, well, because this is so uncomfortable and awful, I'm palliative in my mental health. And that is a common cognition that I have to sort of do battle with folks that are in veterinary medicine and that are experiencing suicide ideation. We also see about 14% of veterinarians that leave their practice doing so because of substance abuse and substance misuse. And that often folks don't seek support because they've got a fear of losing their license. They're already more entrenched in their substance use. And also because their colleagues or staff don't report them because, they don't want to throw anybody under the bus, right? And so there's this kind of secrecy around it, even though maybe there's missing drugs in the office and different things like that. With our students, what we know is that there is higher risk as a result of perceived stress. So the perception of the level of stress is actually deeply detrimental to the individual and can increase their level of stress. And some studies show that 60% of students are taking SSRIs at the time of graduation, which is pretty significant. There's lots of reasons that are attributed to this: competitive ranking atmosphere, fear of accessing help. So then later folks are worried they're not going to be able to get private insurance because they saw a counselor once, and that's a necessity for their business practice. So there's all kinds of stuff there that contributes to the challenges with student stress. And then we have our registered veterinary technicians, and they manage a lot of client concerns, and they manage a lot of the emotional weight of a clinic. And so often those folks feel a lack of respect or control because they have all of the responsibility and none of the control in the clinic. And there's a real kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality that's pretty old school in our registered veterinary technician community. So the unfortunate part is that we see a turnover of about 30% and an average practice life of about 5 years with RVTs. And I think that really the crux of all of this is that professional associations and others are really working to figure out ways to address this stuff. But when you belong to a profession that has high risks associated with it, it just means that you have an extra responsibility and extra due diligence and truly a professional and ethical responsibility to look after yourself. It means that you can't sort of wait until there's time to get well. You have to just look at doing a lot of that preventatively. So I talk about this stuff really openly because I really want to encourage folks to, instead of hiding all of this stuff, instead reach out and access some support where they need to do so. And those supports exist for you guys. Student wellness on campus is amazing. They have wonderful practitioners that are working there that are there to provide you support, and wonderful interdisciplinary team members that can work together to provide you with some support. So if you are somebody that you look at this and this kind of wigs you out and you go, oh, I've struggled over the course of my life and there's some stuff that I should probably look at, let's do it now. Like, now is as good a time as any. And I would just encourage you to go and access that support before you are in the rigmarole of the professional career. So next is this part around the link between human and animal violence. And so I said that I would talk about this a little bit, and this will actually inform some of our next few slides. So way back in about 2008, about 100 dedicated authorities, so these are like advocates, researchers, a number of people that sort of represent this diverse array of animal protection officers and domestic violence survivors and all this kind of stuff. All these disciplines came together at this really unique town hall meeting and national summit in Portland, Maine. And their goal was to build this greater awareness about how these forms of family and community violence are interconnected with this idea of the link. And what they really wanted to do is sort of cross-train and build multidisciplinary teams of people that could work together to address these issues. Because what we know that if there is a presence of abuse against animals and there's children in the home, the children are at risk of violence. And we also know that if there is intimate partner violence or domestic violence happening in the home and there's animals in the home, animals are often used as a mechanism to leverage against survivors of violence, a means of control, all different kinds of stuff. Abusers use animals in all kinds of different ways. And then the same goes for elder abuse, right? We know that in instances where we see significant neglect of animals, and we know that there are older individuals in the home, that we also see a link there between the violence against animals as well as older persons. So this is me just sort of hoping that as you guys go into your varied practices as physiotherapists and pharmacists and nutritionists and veterinarians, that when you guys are seeing folks come through your door where you're really preoccupied with what's going on with the human side of things, paying attention to whether or not there's indicators with the animal. And then you veterinary folks, this is my plea to you, that if you are seeing forensic evidence of animal-related abuse happening with your patients when they're coming in, whether or not you are assessing and then reporting to the necessary folks that could support you in other professions, whether you're assessing that animal and then also assessing for what the family system looks like. Like, are there kids in that house? Did somebody who brought in that dog also come in with a black eye? And then what services are available in your community? And my hope is that by all of you guys showing up together at IPASS and getting to know each other, that we can use those relationships to help foster those bridges now, so that when you are done school, you go, oh yeah, there was a role for veterinarians in my pharmaceutical practice or in my physiotherapy practice. So all that to be said, I just want to sort of emphasize that we know that these links exist. So what does this actually look like? Well, this was a case from 2007. And so that was when the original case happened. And this home came, and the reports around this home came in through an animal protection agency. And really what everyone was very concerned about was the status of the animals on the property, right? So there was very skinny horses, there were rabbits and chickens that were housed inappropriately and in, horrible conditions. The kittens there, they are all struggling with ear mites and upper respiratory issues. So there's all of this stuff going on. And, already one of our vulnerable populations involved in this case, as you guys can see from my question up there, is the animals, right? That's a vulnerable population. But you know who else was living in this circumstance? We had grandkids that were staying overnight at the home, and the residents, I'll just go back up a slide, the residence that you can see up in that left-hand corner was cluttered all the way right to the rafters. And as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner there, covered in feces. So we had grandkids coming here, and then we had an elderly aunt that was living upstairs and paying rent to live in this sort of horrible home environment, and her checks were going to her niece and nephew, and she wasn't seeing a dime of any of her OAS or CPP or any of her money that was meant for her. So here we go. We've got exactly what I'm talking about, right? So the case comes in, it comes in through an animal protection officer, and all of a sudden we have all of these other vulnerable populations who are attached. So who are some of the folks that you might need to contact? Well, probably RCMP. Now, RCMP, we're already coming out on that call because when Animal Protection Services delivers different warrants, they often do so in coordination with an RCMP officer. So there's one of our agencies that definitely needed to be contacted. Other agencies that needed to be contacted included, yes, you guessed it, the Ministry of Social Services, because we had children at risk of abuse, harm, or neglect. And so those agencies needed to be connected. Public health needed to be connected to the case because there was significant issues related to the stability of the home and the fact that it was being operated as a rental property with the elderly aunt living in there, and all of the concerns associated with that. Public guardian and trustee, who's attached to the Ministry of Social Services and who is responsible for those persons that can't sort of take care of their own funds and need support. They needed to be contacted, especially because we knew there was financial abuse going on. So just by virtue of the Animal Protection Agency being called out to look at these animals, they were able to then be able to access all of these other professionals that needed to be involved to intervene in what was truly a really troublesome case. So these are the basic practice questions that I want you guys to be asking yourselves is, what vulnerable populations are involved and what agencies should you be connecting with when you see stuff come across your desk? Are you supposed to be the only gig in town, or is this beyond your scope of practice? And are there other folks that you should know about that you want to access? And often I get asked when I show this slide about the types of animal hoarding, because this was very clearly a clutter hoarding situation, and there was so many varieties of animals on this property in poor condition. So there are three major types of individuals who engage in hoarding-like behaviors with animals. If you want to nerd out on this stuff and you're like, Erin, I want to know more about hoarding and about how it all works, we don't have a ton of time today for me to go into all the details about it. Go to the Tufts website, like TUFTS, Tufts University website. Go check it out. Petronek and company have all of their stuff up there, including his sort of landmark or their landmark publication that they created that was about interprofessional approaches to hoarding. Because at some point, all of y'all are going to come across a hoarding situation in your career, and none of us can deal with hoarding on our own. We all need to be connecting with other healthcare practitioners to appropriately support an individual who's struggling with animal hoarding or with any type of hoarding. And on there, you're going to see the exploiter type is at the top. The exploiter type is like less than 2% of the cases. The vast majority of cases of individuals that are overwhelmed by animals fall into those other two types, the rescuer or the overwhelmed caregiver. And the rescuer often believes that they're running an animal rescue, but things never seem to get adopted. And their most driving motivation is to continue rescuing animals. It's coming from this very strong, value-driven, altruistic place. But what's happening is they've also missed what's in front of them. They're not able to sort of have any insight around the fact that the animals that are in front of them aren't doing well at all. And then the overwhelmed caregiver, often those folks are really receptive to downsizing and to not having as many critters. And it's usually just a situation where litters have gotten out of control. And often prosecuting that person is really unnecessary and totally counterproductive because it really doesn't do anything to support them. And I guess the number one thing that I want to sort of challenge you guys to do is, rather than thinking about hoarding in terms of the TLC show Hoarders and the absolute sensationalization of it, but to think about this in terms of issues related to geriatrics, issues related to mental health, and making sure that you're thinking about people in a really empathetic way, because that exploiter type, that is not the typical. So the next part of the link that I want to talk about is intimate partner violence and domestic violence. So specifically a cats and rats case that I had. So I had, I obviously have changed the details of things in case anybody thinks I forgot my code of ethics. I've just sort of amalgamated different cases together to be able to give you guys a bit of a screenshot of what my work life looks like. But I had a call where I had a client asking about further information about animal protection laws. She had been planning to leave her partner for about 6 months, and she had been working on it with her counselor. She had determined the date and time when she could safely leave, and realized at that time when she was planning to leave that she could only accommodate taking one of her cats. So she had not planned for their exit as well as her own with her support system. So she really wasn't sure what she should do. And she had to leave during this window of opportunity. So the following day, she received a phone call from her ex-partner saying she had nothing to worry about. They were, quote, all gone now. And out of fear for her animals, she returned to the residence to find that he had drowned her rats and her other cat. And this is not uncommon, you see, because a kitty cat can be accommodated very easily, but rats not so much. And lots of places don't have animal safekeeping programs for survivors of violence that are trying to plan to leave. And so what we find is that lots of folks, and actually I'll say women because it's largely women that have been studied, will stay anywhere from 3 months to 2 years longer in an abusive relationship because there's no way to accommodate their cats or rats or other companion animals. And so, being able to think about that when you come across intimate partner violence in your own practice and when you're thinking about supporting somebody is, what were the risks associated with this? Well, she went back to a residence, and we know that when a person leaves a violent relationship, that's when they're at the highest risk of actually being killed by their partner. And here she returned because he had baited her into coming back because the animals had died. So, safety planning for animals is really big in terms of people's willingness to leave and also ability to stay away. And then also, planning for their future safety. And so, what was missing from the initial assessment by her counselor? Just safety planning for her cats and rats, right? That probably should have been at the forefront. What happened there where those animals were killed is those are Criminal Code and Animal Protection Act violations. So you can be criminally charged for that. So what resources exist to support individuals with pets and intimate partner violence? Well, there's animal safekeeping processes. And, when I think about this and I think about what kind of support she needs now, well, she needs support related to not only being a trauma survivor associated with domestic violence and intimate partner violence, but also with the grief and loss and trauma of losing her animals. So you're like, Erin, great, safety planning for pets. How do we do this? Well, cool beans. So my buddy, Michelle Lem, I should say Dr. Michelle Lem, she's fancy. She runs community veterinary outreach in Ottawa, and she and I partnered together to create a safety planning for pets sort of process and checklist. If you guys want to access this, you can access it actually on the Veterinary Medical Center website under Veterinary Social Work. This is there, as well as a whole pile more information about the link between human and animal violence. So if this is something that you feel like you should collect, hint, hint, for your future work, hint, hint, that's one of the places you can get it. Moving into elder neglect, geriatric issues, and interprofessional issues. This was a different case where it actually involved cows, and then it involved cows and lots of cats. And we had a situation here where an elderly brother and sister were living together. They were in their 80s. He was struggling with he was not ambulatory. Well, he was, but not really. So he was struggling on a walk, and she was legally blind. And the complaint came in actually from a postmaster to the animal, or a postman, whatever, to the animal protection officers. And that person had hand delivered mail and then discovered that the house was in this kind of disarray. And so the animal protection officers came in and found a number of cats, both alive and deceased, within the home. Cats were being fed ground grain. Most of them had respiratory diseases, bad or no teeth, eye infections, severe ear mites. So the animal protection officers were able to attend with a warrant and seize the kitty cats and ascertain that there was care for the cattle. But then again, we're in a situation where this is not something that animal protection officers need to be doing on their own. They need healthcare professionals. And so these are the circumstances where we need to have public health officials involved in this. We need to have our CMP involved, potentially public guardian and trustee. We may need an acute care assessment, all of that kind of stuff. And in this case, unfortunately, we didn't have as good of an outcome because of where they were located. They sat right on the border of a number of different jurisdictions. And so what we had was everybody washing their hands of this because it was going to be a challenging case to manage. Now, how deeply sad is that? So what ended up happening is he actually ended up dying in this home, and she was later then brought into acute care in very dire straits, and ended up being transferred into long-term care. And that is what happens when you have what I call interprofessional issues. That is what happens when you have a pile of folks that really all need to be coming together, but everyone's going, oh, well, it's not quite in my area, or it's not quite my problem. And what I hope to light as a fire in you guys is that you guys, instead of wanting to sort of, I don't know, abdicate responsibility, that you take stuff like this on, and that you find your advocacy bones, and you find your advocacy muscles, and you learn how to stretch them. You learn, how your legislation can be used to protect people, as well as how your legislation can be used to let yourself off the hook. That's kind of what I'm getting at. So what supports would you try to assess for? Like, did they have any family? They didn't. Did they have any other informal supports? So they had a neighbor that was actually feeding the cows hay, so they were in pretty good shape. What agencies? I've kind of already talked about it previously, but public health, public guardian and trustee. We really needed a geriatric assessment, and we also needed the ability to bring them in safely for an acute care assessment. And that was very, very challenging in this case because some of our members of the RCMP were not comfortable using their legislation in the way that they can to protect people. They felt uncomfortable doing so. So they weren't willing to use their Section 20 to bring these folks in. And what are some the challenges in service delivery? Well, it's what I was saying, right? They were right on sort of the border of everybody and nobody's territory. And so that's where we resulted with a really sad and unfortunate circumstance. So in lots of circumstances, we can intervene appropriately, but in some circumstances, it gets really, really hard if we don't have interprofessional collaboration. The next piece that we're going to talk about is grief and loss. And I guess I don't want to go into this in a whole heck of a lot of detail, just by virtue of the fact that we don't have a ton of time today. But if you are coming across folks who have experienced the loss of a companion animal, I guess all I ask is that you talk to them about their companion animal the same you would as any other family member. And the reason is because the grief and loss associated with the loss of a companion animal is just as devastating to folks as the loss of any other family member. And so we need to be really respectful of that. There's a guy by the name of Doka who came forward with this idea of disenfranchised grief. So this is grief that isn't socially acceptable. And let me tell you, the owners of companion animals frequently experience disenfranchised grief because the folks around them maybe either don't understand the nature of the relationship or don't respect it, or it's still just sort of not socially acceptable. Lots of us are really lucky that we've got good humans around us that can sort of help us with our grief and with our loss and understand our love of our animals, but some folks aren't so lucky. So for the vets in the room, it's this kind of stuff that I want you guys to be thinking about. Now's the time for you folks to start thinking about quality of life decision making. So how do you help your client with euthanasia decision making? Because that is going to be a part of your practice. What are some of the questions your client might have? What tools can you give your client to help you explore quality of life? In this case, this was an elderly lady, and she needed some additional supports after her dog's death because her dog was her only companion that was left in the world. So what kinds of support might somebody need? And what are some examples of supports that might be available for your clients? So in Saskatoon, we're really, really lucky. We've got great counseling services. We've got Bev at the Pet Loss Support Group, first and third Sunday of every month at the W.B. Edwards Center. Bev is the most loving individual that I have maybe ever met. And there's supports in place in our city, but I think wherever you end up practicing or working, it'd be really good for you to get a foundation in what are the local mental health supports and what are the local pet loss supports that might support your clients. And same goes for all of you guys that aren't in veterinary medicine. You are going to be providing support to people and they are going to lose their animals and they're going to be devastated. And it would be good for you to have some vocabulary, some understanding, and some ability to provide support related to grief and loss. And there's quality of life decision-making skills. Obviously, vet students that are on here, I'd love for you guys to have a look at this. Same for everybody else, though. And if you yourself have an animal that may be aging, I want you to know that these things exist, or an animal that is not feeling well or sick. I want you guys to know this stuff exists. You can access all of these quality of life decision-making tools on the Veterinary Medical Center website under Veterinary Social Work. So there's the HHHMMM scale. There is, I didn't believe in sort of reinventing anything. So the University of Tennessee Knoxville has an end-of-life values and goals worksheet that I have linked on there. And then there's quality of life measures and a bit of a flow sheet there for folks making decisions. And really what guides those quality of life decisions is the 5 freedoms. So we really just want to make sure that animals are free from discomfort due to environment or from pain, hunger, thirst, malnutrition, injury, disease, fear, distress, and then have that ability to express normal behavior for their species. And these are some stems that I've created for folks to help with those kinds of conversations. So if you guys decide you want to look at this later, by all means. And those stems are really just to help you guide those conversations as you need. And Kylie, I'm aware that I'm running short on time, so I promise you I'm flying through as swiftly as I can here. So the other thing that I often get called out to deal with is high mortality livestock issues. So Southwest Saskatchewan a couple of years ago lit quite on fire. I believe the winds were 120 kilometers an hour. I think we had 5 or 6 RMs that were specifically impacted. We had individuals who died fighting the fire. We had much livestock that also died as a result of the fire. And I think lots of folks go, oh, it's livestock, everybody has insurance. That is not the case. This meant financial ruin for a lot of folks. And we have to remember also that our farming communities have higher incidences of mental health related concerns. And there's a greater stigma in our rural communities around accessing support. So if you are working in healthcare and you go work in rural, I would love for you to get really comfortable about asking some very basic questions about mental health. Even if you don't consider yourself a mental health practitioner, it would be really great if you could get comfortable having those conversations so that we can make sure that our rural areas are more well supported and where we can break down that stigma around mental health. But in these kinds of circumstances, my immediate plans are typically, because I'm dealing with this from a macro perspective, so very high level perspective, my immediate plans are about really activating local supports, creating networks of people and places that people can go for support, working with local mental health folks to help them understand the impact on agriculture, because sometimes they don't. The plans that I have in the weeks that follow often involve making sure that everybody is getting good follow-up support that needs it, whether that's veterinarians who are attending to the euthanasias that need to happen or to the needs of their clients in agriculture, or treating the medical conditions that come out of a disaster like this, or, you know, the other individuals who are, you know, dealing with the aftermath of disaster and trauma. And so my concerns in the coming months are always related to things like the private and proud nature of rural communities and how everybody will tend to close ranks. And, you know, if people aren't doing boots on the ground support for individuals in those communities, sometimes it just doesn't happen. So let's talk about social work practice in general, and then we are nearly done. So lots of folks look at social work and say, well, it's just child protection or social assistance, and that's all we do. I just would encourage you to kind of think of social work as moving beyond that. So I think it's close to 80% of mental health practitioners in the province currently are registered social workers, and we use all kinds of theory and practice basics or basis to inform our practice. So we don't just do CBT. Some of us do cognitive behavioral therapy, but lots of us use narrative therapy and solution-focused therapy and emotionally focused therapy and somatic experiencing, all these other different things that are here. So if these are things that you are, sorry, my kitty cat, you can't see him, but he's about to start screaming. If these are things that you've never heard of, and all you've heard of is there's only one way to connect with people when doing a little bit of counseling, take some time and explore what other theories might be able to inform your practice. And this is largely for the healthcare folks, but these are important things for you guys to know exist, because these are alternative ways to connect with people that actually might be a better fit for them. And so there's more than just CBT out there, is basically what I'm getting at. And there's lots of different approaches that can be really, really useful in terms of you being able to support your clients in a good and full way. So just always keep learning, I guess, is what I'm getting at. And this is where we get to talk about the happier stuff for a hot minute. And so even though there's all these challenges that exist, and these are the kinds of things that as a veterinary social worker, like I said, social workers don't always get called when things are good, right? They tend to call us when things are a hot mess. But I am so aware of the positive impacts that animals have on people's lives. And so when I was talking before at the very beginning about One Health, and I was saying, oh, you know, it's about the transmission of disease, and that's how we've always understood it. Zuea is kind of the opposite of that. It's defined as the positive or inverse of zoonoses. So zoonoses are all those diseases that transmit between human beings and animals. This represents the sort of innumerable benefits that stem from human interaction with animals. So we know that like cat ownership in particular significantly reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease and associated death. This holds true regardless of age, gender, ethnicity, your systolic blood pressure, whether you smoke cigarettes, whether you have diabetes. It doesn't matter what your serum cholesterol is. It doesn't matter what your body mass index is. None of that matters. Acquisition of cats as domestic pets might actually just represent a totally novel strategy for reducing cardiovascular disease in high-risk individuals. And you guys are going, what? And I'm going, yeah, this is the stuff that we know is out there. So just owning a kitty cat is good for your ticker. And really, stressful events tend to escalate in the lives of elder folks, as I've already talked about a little bit here. You know, their social supports and physical capabilities might diminish over time. Friends and partners die. Their health might begin to deteriorate. It's not uncommon for us to see higher levels of depression in older folks. And so this is where when we see pet ownership being a huge strength, because it actually reduces the demand on our care system in times of stress, alleviating costs to our healthcare system, because our older folks who are supported and having a companion animal see this true companionship, sense of security, and feeling of being loved that is really, really a strength-based part of having an animal be a part of your lives. And we also know that pets, you know, they keep us from being socially isolated, right? So if you have a dog and you go to the dog park, well, there you go, right? So we know that pets really encourage folks to engage in reciprocity. So people who have pets are way more likely to engage in give and take in their relationships. And this is kind of a weird stat, but I think it's good for you guys to know. About 57% of folks, pet owners are 57% more likely to be civically engaged. Yeah, they're more likely to be involved in their communities by about 57%. So after showing you all those images of the gnarly stuff, I wanted to just kind of end our time together with showing you some images that are less horrible, and in fact, I think are great. And when I was originally starting to do these presentations, I gave a shout out on social media and I sort of said, hey, if you're okay with me forever using your image in perpetuity in presentations, send it to me and I'm going to make it a part of a collage to demonstrate Whaddya. So within, like, no joke, about an hour, I had all of these images and more. So we have guinea pigs and ferrets and dogs and cats and all kinds of stuff here, and horses. And so that was within about an hour. And then shortly thereafter, the pig and chicken people demanded to be heard. And so I had to make another slide with all of those folks in it. And this is just for you guys to see what I anticipate you see in your own lives, which is that companion animals and the animals that we share our lives with really bring so much joy. And they can be such a strength for folks. And so what we want to do is support people in being able to maintain companion animal relationships as much as possible. So how do I include them as protective factors in my practice? Well, so these are some of the upshots of really challenging circumstances where animals have just played such a significant strength-based role in people's lives. I had a client, numerous suicide attempts and stays in hospital until adopting a pet. And then he said, if I die, who's going to take care of them? So I have to get out of bed to look after them. And that was one of the major barriers to him being able to manage his depression-like symptoms. I had another client, she was studying for a major exam, and animals were the only reason she'd give herself a break. She wouldn't stop for anything else, but she would stop to look after her animals. So we planned stress-reducing cat pets twice a day. Seems wild, made huge difference. And as you guys know from the Whaddya slide, that's why. I had another client asked if she could bring her dog to sessions, and I said, sure. And it was later revealed that she was able to avoid dissociating while talking about really traumatic circumstances. When her dog was present, she was able to stay grounded and she didn't go into a freeze state because her dog really helped her with that. So amazing. That I don't know that I could have gotten that same level of grounding from doing orienting exercises with her. Another client who quit smoking because he found out that his cat's fur held on to secondhand smoke and increased the risk of cancer to her. So he began to smoke outside, cut back, eventually quit. And then also working with survivors of domestic violence. You know, when he broke her dog's ribs, she knew that she couldn't protect her dog anymore. And so for that reason, that was her catalyst for leaving. So all I'm saying is just start where you are and just ask about people's animals, because the other coolest thing about asking about people's pets is, unlike asking them about their children or whether they're going to have children or about money or about anything like that, when people have been surveyed and asked about their pets, they will happily disclose all kinds of stuff about themselves in relation to their relationship with their animal. And even better, those people who don't have pets don't get offended if you ask. So that is also just the coolest. So just start where you are, just ask, and do your best. So that is my big, long presentation. Holy Diana, trying to stop sharing. Did I stop sharing? Can you see? You can see me now.
Yeah.
Oh, we plowed through. We did her. My cat didn't scream. He's sitting right here. I was convinced he was going to start screaming. But that's kind of my spiel. And so all I'm getting at is that animals are a real strength for folks. So I'm not seeing a ton in the chat related to questions. Kylie, were there any questions that came in while I was yakking?
No, not to me at least. So if anyone
Okay.
has any questions now, either send it to everyone in the chat. You can send it to Erin. You can send it to me if you don't feel comfortable with all 140 people seeing it.
I don't know why we'd all of a sudden we'd feel shy. I mean, just kidding. Absolutely, we'd feel shy. I think that what gets me most excited about doing these presentations is interprofessional practice and interprofessional collaboration is what is going to save your bacon when you get into a tough spot with a client. I am so grateful to all the connections that I have in a pile of different professions and the paraprofessionals I also work with. Tremendously grateful. I know when something is just not my strength. And I think that things like IPASS are really about us encouraging you guys to start thinking about that now so that you don't feel like the world is on your shoulders. You feel like you've got other folks that you can rely on to access in terms of support, in terms of knowledge, and that you take the pressure off of yourself to sort of learn your own profession really, really, really well, and then be able to support other professions. And when you learn about the intersections of where your professions can intersect, that is also the coolest, because those are the cases that are going to surprise you the most. Those are the ones. So I'm not seeing any questions coming in. Are you seeing any?
I have one question that came up. Someone asked, how do they adopt a pet?
That's a great question. So here's what I say. First of all, do a little self-assessment. When you think about adopting a pet, what does that mean to you? You know, what is important to you? What's your value system around adopting pets? And you know, what kind of pet can you manage? Okay, number one thing, because sometimes we get folks that get animals that are a little too high energy for them or a little too low energy for them, and then it's not a good match. So thinking first about, you know, doing a little bit of research about the type of animal. Number two, look at the reputable places. So, you know, it's really, really smart to look at what your local humane societies are doing. It's really, really smart to look at what your local sort of rescue organizations are doing, but pay attention to the ones that seem to be linked up with everyone else. I encourage you to try to avoid like fringy operations, because as we were talking about before in the rescuer slide, you get what I'm saying. So look at the reputation and then look at what they ask you, right? Do they grill you before they give you a critter, or are they just like, here you go, right? And that's also something that speaks to sort of their expectations about where they want their critters to go. Do you want to add anything, Kylie? Because that feels like a veterinary question.
Not really, I don't think. I think you did a pretty good summary. I'd say the same things. Like, just make sure you're kind of assessing yourself and what kind of pet you can manage.
Cool.
Do your research. But
yeah, man. Oh, speaking of critters, I love that your dog is hanging out in the background.
Yeah, when you said fringy operation, weird side note. Also, I'll just say this first before I go to my weird side note. Everyone that's here, you can feel free to leave whenever. I don't think there's going to be any more questions coming in. So if you need to get going, don't feel like you need to stick around for this.
I'm not holding you. I'm not holding you hostage here. No, not at all. But I will say, I'm going to show you guys this guy. This is my giant cat, Trouvé. Trouvé is the cutest ever. And he was silent through this whole presentation, which is not his MO. He screams all day long. So I think that it was your guys' like mojo or vibes that put him to sleep on my desk. So I feel like I want to have these 140 people with me all day, every day. Because usually as soon as I start doing anything, he's like, Mom, and he yells. So back to what you were going to say, fringy operation.
Fringy operation, that's exactly where this dog came from. Like a really kind of weird rescue in Saskatoon that ended up not being the best upon further investigation. But we ended up he ended up fitting perfect and we kept him and it ended up good, and kind of happy we got him out of that situation.
Fair.
But definitely do your research, because
it's
easy to get distracted by like just kind of seeing what they have on social media, etc. Do your research.
And social media is not a good indicator. Your best indicator is to actually be able to go to a facility and see, or like meeting in a parking lot at Safeway or whatever, Sobeys or wherever, is just not. It's good if they have a facility and some infrastructure and those kinds of things. That's my plug. I love that your dog is doing yoga in the background here, like straight up downward dog.
I'm surprised that he wasn't bothering me more during this presentation either. He actually just kind of chilled. So.
Well, listen, if there aren't going to be any more questions that have come in to either yourself or myself, I think what we'll do is we'll call her a day. But I did want to just throw out there that if you guys have greater interest or you want me to elaborate on anything, you let me know. My email is available through IPASS, but it's vet.socialwork@usas.ca. All of you guys are so sweet with your thank yous. I'm reading them all as they're popping up. You are very welcome. And I really want you to know that I'm very excited for you. So I am going on 15 years, pretty close, to working in human health, and specifically in areas of working with vulnerable populations. And that predates my social work degree, but how long I've been doing it, and I still love it. So not everything is going to be burnout and bad news. There is also so much that you are going to do as a part of your careers to help people, and that is going to be sensational and rewarding. But the last plug that I will make, it's the last thing I'm going to say because it's 6:31, is you need to have a life outside of your work. So I'm going to sign off because I've got a pony to ride and some kitties to feed. But I really, really encourage you guys to build a good and full life outside of your programs and outside of your work, so that when things are harder at work, that's not the only thing you got going on. Cool? Cool. Okay. Well, I'm going to peace out, Kylie. I will see you guys later. Thank you, everybody.